Hello everyone, this is Reggie Dawson for the Building Apps with Intel XDK and Parse course for Tuts Plus. In this video, we are going to create our custom service to drive our app. All of the services configured in the Intel XDK are defined in the IO docs format. This specification created by Mashery is labeled as an interactive documentation system, but it is much more. Within the XDK, it allows you to add data to your app as simply as a drag and drop affair. It is a little complicated to set up, but it is worth it. This is the last of the coding we will have to do to create this app. Here's an overview of the syntax of IO docs. The menus you see when you access the services in the XDK are based off the IO docs configuration stored in the XDK. Let's create our service. Click on the plus sign in the Web Services pane to create a new web service. It explains that adding the new service is a three-step process. First, we have to edit our API config.json file. This file lists all of the services defined for this project. It contains information as well as the base URL for the service. You can also specify any JavaScript libraries that the service uses. Then we have to edit the IO docs file. In our case, it will be called parse.json. This file describes the endpoints and APIs within the service. And lastly, the JS file, in our case parse.js, which links the methods in the IO docs file to the API calls of the service. Name your service Parse and click Create. All three of the files we need can be found in the IO docs folder, inside the services folder, inside of the XDK folder. The API config.json file has the name of our service, a description, and a URL to an example dashboard. It also has one authorization key, an additional required library, and a signature. Parse.json describes the methods to grab information from a REST API. This file actually specifies the options you have when using the web services inside the XDK. Parse.js are the actual API calls referenced in the parse.json file. These methods are what makes the XDK web services work. After creating our service, we have to save and restart the XDK. Instead of me editing the files, I've copied over files I've already configured. I have included the files in the course notes. API config.json has a name of Parse API. The description is backend. The dashboard URL is the Parse homepage. The authorization is in two parts, with a key and an API secret needed, as Parse requires two API keys to use the REST API. Parse.json has been simplified and now has one method under endpoints. The name Parse methods will be displayed in the web services when we browse the Parse. The dashboard URL is a link to the documentation for the Parse REST API. Under methods, we have one method called articles. The synopsis explains what the method does. The parameter is an additional option that we can add. This parameter has a name of ID, is not required, and has a default empty string. It also has the type of string and a description of article ID. Since we have one method, we need to be able to return all of the articles or just a single article. This optional parameter can be added to access a single article. If there is no parameter, all of the articles will be returned. The parse.js file has one method that corresponds to the method in parse.json. First, we create an empty object called exports. Then we create a variable to hold the base URL we use to access the REST API of Parse. Next, we have the exports.articles method. This method has the parameter of params, as IO docs returns parameters. On the next line, params is set to the past params or an empty object if there are no parameters passed. Next, we check if params.id was passed. Remember our optional parameter ID? We can access it through params.id. If the ID was passed, we assign it to the artID variable. We then append artID to the base URL. To access a single object in Parse, we use the ID. With the REST API, we add the ID after the class. Then we use the jQuery AJAX method to return the request. First, we have our URL grabbing all the articles or just one article. Then we have our authentication and our headers. This is where the app key and the REST API key that you supplied when you set up this service will be used. Lastly, the exports are returned. If we explore our web services, Parse should be there. As you can see, we have parse methods, which is the name we set inside of our parse.json file. And then we have our single method articles. If this is your first time setting up Parse, you're going to have to put in your app key and your REST API key. Notice that the optional parameter of ID is there with the description of article ID. Remember we set this up in our parse.json file? Let's try to send a request for all articles. It should return all 5 of our articles. Now let's find the object ID of one of the returned articles and type it in the ID parameter. It should return one article. Remove the ID and click More Details. This will show any responses and help you troubleshoot if the API call fails. Try the API again without an ID so we can get all of the articles. Scroll through the return data and check the fields you want to use in your app. We need the article, teaser, title, and the URL of the picture. We only have to select the fields for one article. It automatically selects them all. After selecting the fields, let's create a data binding called parse articles. Let's use this in App Designer. We now have our custom service set up. In the next video, we will start to build our app.